This camera is supposed to record a Soviet missile launch, but instead, it captured something far more horrifying. It's October 24th, 1960. The prototype R-16 intercontinental ballistic missile has been installed on Launching Pad 41, awaiting final tests before launch. Due to the numerous unresolved problems, approximately 250 personnel stand around the fully fueled ICBM. The program is already behind schedule, and Chief Marshal Mitrofan Niedelin is demanding rapid progress to achieve a test launch ahead of schedule. However, none of them realized the second stage engine, designed to ignite only once the missile reached the upper atmosphere, was about to fire on the launch pad, turning 130 tons of self-igniting propellant into a toxic, inescapable firestorm. The premature ignition of the second stage engine should have been impossible, but the R-16 was not an ordinary rocket. It was a new Soviet intercontinental ballistic missile built under extreme Cold War pressure as the Soviet Union realized it was losing the race. While American politicians warned that Moscow had more missiles, the reality was the opposite. The Soviets only had 4 operational ICBMs, while the Americans already had around a dozen. Their only real ICBM model, the R-7, was nearly useless in combat. It relied on liquid oxygen that had to be loaded just before launch and took 2 hours to prepare. This new R-16, however, used storable propellants that could sit inside the rocket for 30 days and be launched within 5 to 6 minutes. This was a massive advantage, but it came with a terrifying cost. You see, the mixture was so corrosive and poisonous that the engineers gave it a name: Devil's Venom. It was made from 2 separate liquids, a hydrazine-based fuel and an oxidizer made from nitric acid and nitrogen tetroxide. Together, they were hypergolic, meaning they ignited on contact without any spark or ignition system. In liquid form, the propellants could eat through metal, and when burned, they released clouds of poisonous gas. But what made it truly dangerous was that once the rocket was fueled, there was no simple way to drain it and make it safe again. So if something went wrong, the crew still had to work around a fully fueled missile, loaded with 130 tons of toxic, self-igniting propellant. And when the R-16 arrived at the Tyuratam test range, that danger became real immediately. Marshal Mitrofan Niedelin, under pressure from Khrushchev and the Kremlin, pushed to get the missile launched before the November 7th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, nearly a year earlier than originally planned. In order to achieve this and save time, no practice model was built, and the men preparing the rocket were about to fuel it for the very first time. On top of that, the guidance system had barely been tested, and its instructions were unclear. By October 21st, the rocket was on Pad 41, and by the 23rd, it was fully fueled. Under safety rules, Pad 41 should have been cleared, but it wasn't. With the marshal himself standing right there, no one dared enforce the rules. Niedelin, Mikhail Yangel, the chief designer, and around 250 personnel remained on or near the pad, including civilians watching from close by. That evening, the first problem came from the control panel. While technicians were preparing the missile for launch, they sent a command through the control panel to rupture pyrotechnic membranes in the second stage oxidizer line. These membranes were thin sealed barriers that kept propellant from entering the engine feed lines too early. But because of faulty control panel wiring, the command went to the wrong place, blowing open the fuel line membranes on the first stage instead. This was serious. With those first stage membranes gone, corrosive propellant was now reaching the engine lines. That meant the rocket couldn't safely stay on the pad for more than 2 days. A hard deadline had just been created out of nowhere. To make it even worse, pyrotechnic devices on one of the engines started firing on their own, followed by the unit supplying electrical power to the rocket also failing. The safest choice was obvious: drain the propellant, stop the launch, and send the missile back for repairs. But Niedelin refused. Instead of backing away from the fully fueled rocket, the exhausted crews spent the entire night repairing it on the pad and even checking for damaged parts by smell. By morning, many of them had been awake for nearly 72 hours. Exhausted, overworked, and still standing beside a fueled bomb, the final mistake was next. After being awake for that long, mistakes are inevitable. While most of us will never face anything close to this, a lot of us do spend long hours working, driving, training, or trying to get through the day, which is where today's sponsor, Audible, comes in. Audible is one of the easiest ways to make that time feel useful. You can listen to audiobooks, podcasts, and originals across history, science, biographies, business, and more, including plenty of stories like these, whether you're on a road trip, on the beach, or just taking a break from staring at a screen. Right now, anyone eligible for an Audible trial can get Audible Standard for just 99 cents a month for the first 3 months, whether they're a Prime member or not. After that, the membership renews at $8.99 per month, and you can cancel anytime. Click the link in the description to claim the limited time offer. After an earlier test, a device called the PTR, a distributor that switched the rocket systems on in a set sequence during launch, had been left in its post-launch position. With the batteries on both stages live and the membranes on the second stage already blown, the propellants were now held back from the engine by a single valve. And at 6:45 in the evening, 30 minutes before the scheduled launch, someone in the bunker asked whether to move the PTR back to zero. The answer came back, "Go ahead." The missile instantly ignited. As the PTR turned back to zero, the second stage engine fired, rupturing the first stage fuel tank directly below, causing a massive explosion. 130 tons of devil's venom went up in a toxic fireball, swallowing the entire launch pad and killing everyone in close proximity instantly. What happened next was captured by the cameras set up to film the launch, remotely activated by the operator before taking cover. Figures stumbled across the pad, engulfed in flames. Those on the upper levels of the launch tower had nowhere to go, while others on the ground ran for their lives. But the pad had been laid with fresh tar that melted in the 3,000 degrees Celsius heat, and anyone trying to flee sank into it and became trapped. Some were killed instantly. Others died trying to escape, tangled in the barbed wire fencing around the perimeter, or dropping into drainage wells to escape the flames, only to suffocate on the toxic fumes. The fire burned for 2 hours, and flashes were visible 50 kilometers away, in the settlement where the workers' own families lived. Almost all of the victims were burned beyond recognition. Among the dead was Marshal Nedelin, along with many top-ranking Soviet officials from the Soviet missile program. Investigators could later only identify Nedelin by the melted remains of the Gold Star medal from his uniform. Luckily for Yangel, the chief designer, he and 3 other senior engineers stepped away for a cigarette behind the nearby command bunker moments before the blast. The cigarette break saved their lives, but Yangel had to be restrained from running toward the flames. When Khrushchev later confronted him and asked him why he had survived when so many others had not, Yangel reportedly answered, "I stepped away for a smoke. It's all my fault." The official death toll reached at least 92, though independent estimates run far higher, some past 150. With some of the most senior officials dead, the Soviet missile program was left in ruins, but almost immediately the cover-up began. Soviet newspapers announced that Marshal Nedelin had died in a plane crash, nothing about a missile. The lie was written into the official record, and he was given a state funeral in Red Square. The same story was told to the families of the other victims. Only later did relatives realize how many men had supposedly died in plane crashes on the same day. Even in the sealed military town, it took 3 years before a memorial was allowed over the mass grave. Western intelligence quickly noticed something was off. The CIA found no record of a Soviet plane crash on October 24th, and other reports pointed to a factory order for dozens of aluminum caskets and a major explosion in Central Asia, but the full picture remained hidden. Only in 1989, under Gorbachev's policy of openness, did a Soviet magazine reveal that Nedelin had died not in the sky, but on the launch pad. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the archives opened, and the footage of the explosion was finally released. The investigation traced the immediate cause to the control system. A fault had allowed the second stage engine ignition valve to fire during ground processing. The report noted that the fire could have been avoided if the PTR distributor had been reset to 0 before power was switched on. No one was prosecuted. However, the program did not stop. 5 more R-16s were already being built, and the launch pad was ordered rebuilt within weeks. The dead had barely been buried before the same weapon was back on the launch schedule, and the first launch after the disaster, in February 1961, failed in flight, but the campaign continued. By the end of that year, the R-16 had entered service, eventually becoming the Soviet Union's most widely deployed intercontinental ballistic missile.